Look, as you know, I have said many times that there are 195 countries in the world today. 193 are member states of the United Nations. 2 countries have non-member observer status, the Holy See and the State of Palestine. Now, the common man and woman watching television every night is entitled to wonder how, if 193 countries are member states of the United Nations, how is it possible within the realms of common sense for one man, Vladimir Putin, to murder people and destroy a country? Ukraine is the country, as you know, destroy its infrastructure, its history, its archives, and of course, in the end, its culture. Last week, the White House was asking Congress for an additional $24 billion in Ukraine aid. America has so far given more than $113 billion in aid since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2021. That makes America Ukraine's biggest funder in its defence against Russia and, of course, its defence of freedom. The co-founder of the Russian internet giant Yandex, Arkady Voloz, has condemned what is described as Russia's barbaric invasion of Ukraine days after criticism surfaced in Russia over his apparent efforts to distance himself from his home country. Said the co-founder of the Russian internet giant Yandex, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is barbaric, and I'm categorically against it. I'm horrified about the fate of people in Ukraine, many of them my personal friends and relatives whose houses are being bombed every day, unquote. Well, only last week, Russia carried out several waves of attacks on Ukraine, but the Ukrainian Air Force said it had shot down 30 of the 40 cruise missiles and drones launched by Russia. And only yesterday reports that Ukraine had targeted the only bridge linking Crimea to the Russian mainland on Saturday. Now, Crimea had been annexed by Moscow in 2014. Reports say the bridge wasn't damaged, but it's clear that Ukraine wants to undermine Russia's position in Crimea. Earlier this month, long-range missiles slammed into 2 bridges connecting Crimea to Russian-occupied territory in southern Ukraine. Now, the strategy is, by choking off replenishments of necessities to and from Crimea, Ukraine hopes its limited forces can make life and military operations on the Russian-controlled area untenable, forcing some kind of retreat or negotiation, or in fact permitting a Ukrainian invasion to retake Crimea. Now, it's an outright condemnation of the United Nations that this has been going on since February 2021. Last Saturday week, discussions took place in Saudi Arabia amongst senior officials from 42 countries, including the US, China, India, and Ukraine. They pitched the talks in an effort to rally global support behind conditions for ending the war that would favour, of course, Ukraine. That said, many big developing countries are largely neutral on the conflict. Donald Trump has said simply, we must end the killing. Diplomats confirmed last Saturday week that the central principles of international law, such as respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, should be at the heart of future peace talks between Ukraine and Russia. The talks in Jeddah were symbolic. Saudi Arabia was chosen to host the talks, partly in the hope of persuading China to participate, as Riyadh and Beijing maintain close ties. Nonetheless, many Western officials are deeply sceptical that Putin is even interested in pursuing peace talks this year. Russia, it said, shows no signs of backing away from unacceptable demands, such as the recognition of its annexations of Ukrainian territory, including areas of Ukraine that it doesn't militarily control. China did send a delegation to the talks at the weekend, and Western diplomats said that Beijing did play a genuinely constructive role. As Russia's most important foreign ally, China is seen as crucial to building traction behind the talks, and the expectation is that China would be able to feed into the discussions some of Moscow's concerns. Now, interestingly, during the talks nearly 2 weeks ago, China presented a 12-point plan for a ceasefire and peace talks to end the war, which it first announced, I might add, way back in February. But there is concern that the Chinese proposal was for an unconditional ceasefire, which would merely consolidate Russia's control of Ukrainian territory. Ukraine pushed for major developing countries to accept Zelensky's peace plan, at the heart of which is a demand that peace begin only when Russian forces fully withdraw, and several developing countries said clearly they would not accept such a proposal. Several countries insisted that Zelensky drop it. One diplomat said that it isn't just a European war, because its impact on food, energy and economic stability is a global issue. In a strange world where the United Nations is plainly impotent, our contribution to the United Nations was last assessed at $61 million. 102 of the UN's 193 member states had paid their contribution in full. Now, of those 102 states, Australia is the 8th highest contributor in a UN budget of $3.5 billion. Are we wasting our money? They seem to be useless. Well may Donald Trump say we must stop the killing. Who's going to do it?